My neighbor called, "Movers are emptying your house." Dad laughed, "We sold it for your brother." I smiled, called my lawyer and replied, "Enjoy your felony fraud charges." I was 30 feet in the air, balancing on a narrow plank of scaffolding, when the vibration of my phone against my tool belt completely shattered my focus. I am Valerie. I am 32 years old, and if you look closely at my hands, you will see that they are permanently stained. The skin around my fingernails is slightly discolored from years of working with chemical strippers, and the calluses on my palms are thicker than leather. I am an architectural restorer, a historic home preservation specialist. That means I spend my life traveling to places like Savannah, Georgia, where I currently was, carefully peeling away a century of cheap varnish to reveal the original, beautiful wood underneath. It is a quiet, lonely, and incredibly meticulous profession. But I love it. I love fixing broken things. Maybe because I grew up in a family that was fundamentally broken, and this was my way of taking control. When you grow up with parents like mine, Richard and Margaret, your feelings are constantly invalidated. Everything you do is measured against a sliding scale of impossible expectations, and usually, you come up short. So, I poured all my energy into things that could not lie to me. Wood, stone, mortar, and glass. They are honest materials. If you put in the hard work, they reward you with stability. That philosophy is exactly why I bought my own home back in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was a classic 1920s craftsman bungalow that I purchased as a complete foreclosure. When I signed the papers, the roof had gaping holes, the basement smelled like toxic mold, and there was literally a family of raccoons living in the attic. To anyone else, it was a teardown property. To me, it was a blank canvas. For 4 brutal years, I spent every single weekend, every holiday, and every spare dime I earned bringing that house back to life. I sanded the original oak hardwood floors by hand until my knees bled and my fingerprints were practically worn off. I hunted through salvage yards across 3 states to find period-correct brass hardware for the doors. I taught myself how to reglaze antique windows just so I could keep the original wavy glass. That house was not just a piece of real estate. It was my physical masterpiece. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place on this entire planet where I felt completely safe, mostly because it was the only thing in my life that belonged entirely to me. My name was on the deed. My sweat was in the walls. It was a fortress that I had built to protect myself from the endless, exhausting demands of my family. Or so I thought. I thought that by paying for it with my own money and securing it under my own name, it was untouchable. I was about to learn a very hard, very cold lesson about the lengths toxic parents will go to when they feel entitled to your life. I wiped a smear of sawdust from my forehead, leaving a dark streak across my skin, and pulled my heavy work glove off with my teeth. I fished my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up with the name Mrs. Gable. She was my next-door neighbor back in Cincinnati, a fiercely independent 70-year-old widow who spent 90% of her waking hours tending to her immaculate garden. Mrs. Gable and I had an unspoken understanding. We watched out for each other's properties, but we never intruded. In the 4 years I had lived there, she had called me exactly twice. Once when a stray dog got into my backyard, and once to tell me my front porch light had burned out. So, seeing her name on my screen at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday sent an immediate, icy spike of adrenaline straight into my chest. I swiped to answer, pressing the phone hard against my ear to drown out the sound of a distant air compressor. "Hello, Mrs. Gable? Is everything all right?" Her voice crackled through the speaker, sounding thin, breathless, and deeply confused. "Valerie, honey, I am so sorry to bother you while you are away on your work trip. But I had to call. There are men walking all over your prize-winning rose bushes, and I just cannot understand why the movers are being so reckless." I froze. My hand gripped the metal scaffolding pole so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Movers? Mrs. Gable, what movers? I am in Georgia. There should not be anyone at my house." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to an anxious whisper. Valerie, there is a massive moving truck parked in your driveway. They have been carrying furniture out of your front door for the last hour. I thought you were relocating. But Richard is there. Your father. He is standing on the porch holding a clipboard. The world actually tilted on its axis. I felt a wave of vertigo so strong I had to crouch down on the wooden plank to keep from falling. My father? Mrs. Gable, are you absolutely sure? I am sure, dear. Wait, let me send you a picture. I took one from behind my living room curtains because I did not want to cause a fuss if I was misunderstanding something. My phone buzzed against my ear. I pulled it away and opened my messages. The photo was slightly blurry, taken through the mesh of a window screen, but the image was unmistakable. There was my beautiful, deep green front door, propped wide open. There was a large white box truck idling in my driveway. And there, standing on the top step of my porch, wearing his stupid beige windbreaker and a self-satisfied smirk, was my father. As I zoomed in on the photo, a fresh wave of nausea hit me. The two large men walking past him were carrying my custom-restored, solid oak dining table down the stairs. I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, I experienced a sensation that I can only describe as a total psychological collapse. I felt a complete, physical hollowing out of my chest, as if my internal organs had suddenly turned to dry ice. This was not a burglary. If a stranger breaks into your house and steals your television, it is a violation, but it is a random act of the universe. This was an execution. This was my own father, standing proudly on the steps of the sanctuary I had built with my own bleeding hands, dismantling my life piece by piece. The sheer audacity of it, the profound, sickening betrayal, felt like I was being erased from the family entirely. I was not a daughter. I was a resource being liquidated. I descended the scaffolding with the mechanical, unthinking precision of a robot. My muscle memory took over completely because my conscious brain had essentially short-circuited. I unclipped my safety harness, placed my tools into their designated slots in my heavy canvas bag, and walked straight off the job site without saying a word to the site manager. I climbed into the suffocating heat of my rented sedan, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The silence inside the car was deafening. My fingers were shaking so violently that it took me 3 attempts to unlock my phone screen. I bypassed my father's contact entirely. Richard was a man who thrived on conflict and bluster, calling him would just give him an opportunity to scream at me. Instead, I dialed Margaret. My mother. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was bright, casual, and slightly distracted. In the background, I could hear the distinct clinking of silverware against porcelain and the muffled sound of a daytime television talk show. She was eating breakfast. While strangers were stripping my home bare in another state, my mother was enjoying a pleasant Tuesday morning meal. Mom, I said. My voice sounded completely alien to me. It was a low, strangled croak. Why are there movers at my house? The silverware clinking stopped instantly. The silence on the line stretched out, thick and suffocating. When Margaret finally spoke, the bright, casual tone was entirely gone. It was replaced by the cold, dismissive, slightly annoyed voice she always used when I was being difficult. Oh, for heaven's sake, Valerie, she sighed. Who told you? Was it that nosy old woman next door? We specifically told the movers to be quick so we would not cause a scene. You sold my house, I whispered, the reality of the words burning my throat as I forced them out. Mom, tell me exactly what is happening right now. We are handling a family crisis, Valerie, and we frankly did not have the time to wait for you to come back from whatever dusty old mansion you are playing inside this month, she snapped, her voice rising in defensive irritation. Your brother, Connor, is in very serious trouble. Legal trouble. He needs a massive amount of liquidity immediately, or his life is going to be ruined. Your father and I looked at all our options, and we made an executive family decision. An executive decision about my property? I yelled, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of my hand. My name is on the deed. I am the sole owner. You cannot just sell my house. Actually, we can, and we did, she countered triumphantly, dropping all pretense of maternal affection. We used the power of attorney you signed for us 3 years ago when you went backpacking through Europe. It is perfectly legal. We are your parents, Valerie. It is incredibly selfish of you to hoard a 3-bedroom asset that sits empty half the year while your own flesh and blood is facing catastrophe. We found a cash buyer who wanted it fully furnished. We put your personal clothes in a cheap storage unit downtown. The notary is arriving in 10 minutes to finalize the closing documents, and the money will be wired to us by tomorrow morning. We will discuss paying you back some portion of it when things settle down. Now, I have to go. The line went dead. She hung up on me. I sat in the sweltering heat of the rental car, staring blindly through the windshield. They really did it. They used an old, limited legal document to sell my home right out from under me, just to bail out my 26-year-old brother from another one of his monumental screw-ups. They did not even have the basic human decency to ask me first. They simply evaluated my worth, decided my home was nothing more than an emergency fund for the golden child, and signed my life away. The heat inside the car was becoming unbearable, but the cold realization spreading through my veins was absolute. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just cry, accept it, and start over because I was the good, quiet daughter. But they had miscalculated. Massively. To truly understand the sheer, unadulterated madness of what my parents had just done, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem of my family. More specifically, you have to understand Connor. Connor is my younger brother. He is 26 years old, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was the undisputed prince of the household. My father, Richard, is a 62-year-old retired regional manager for a logistics company. He is a man who firmly believes the world belongs to men who speak the loudest, and he runs his family like a patriarchal dictatorship. He always viewed my career as a cute, slightly embarrassing hobby. He constantly made jokes at Thanksgiving about how I needed to stop playing with hammers, find a nice corporate husband, and settle down. My mother, Margaret, is 60 years old and completely obsessed with the social hierarchy of her suburban country club. To her, appearances are everything. A stain on her reputation is worse than a physical wound. And then there is Connor. Handsome, charming, athletic, and completely devoid of any moral compass or sense of responsibility. When we were kids, if Connor broke a window, Margaret would say I should have been watching him closer. If he failed a college class, Richard would call the dean to complain about unfair grading. But as Connor grew older, his mistakes became infinitely more expensive. When he was 22, he went through a cryptocurrency phase that resulted in a $20,000 loss. Richard quietly drained a portion of his own retirement fund to cover it, claiming it was a learning experience for the boy. When Connor was 24, he started a luxury sneaker resale business that ended in a massive breach of contract lawsuit. Again, my parents swooped in, hired expensive lawyers, and made the problem disappear. Through all of this, I was the designated survivor. The scapegoat. The invisible child. I paid my own way through college by working night shifts. I bought my own cars. I saved every penny to buy my house. I was the reliable, boring daughter who never asked for a dime. In their twisted minds, my independence was not something to be proud of, it was a resource. Because I had proven I could survive on my own, they convinced themselves I did not need anything. Therefore, anything I had was excess, and that excess rightfully belonged to the family collective. Specifically, it belonged to Connor, whenever he needed saving. I leaned my head against the headrest, closing my eyes as the memories washed over me. The sheer entitlement of my mother's voice echoing in my head. An executive family decision. They genuinely believed that because they brought me into this world, they had a supreme, divine right to my assets. They thought the power of attorney gave them the ultimate skeleton key to my life. They had held a family meeting, calculated the value of my blood, sweat, and tears, and decided to sell it to the highest bidder to cover Connor's latest disaster, But as the initial shock began to fade, a dark, pulsing anger started to take its place. It was a cold, calculating rage. In my profession of restoring old houses, when you find black rot deep inside a load-bearing wooden beam, you do not just paint over it to make it look pretty. You take a crowbar, you rip the wall open, you expose the decay to the harsh light of day, and you cut it out completely, no matter how much it compromises the structure in the short term. My parents were the rot. And I was about to swing the crowbar. I reached over, popped the trunk release on the rental sedan, and stepped out into the humid Georgia air. I walked around to the back of the car and stared at my luggage. Because my job required me to live as a nomad for months at a time, bouncing from cheap motels to temporary rental apartments across the country, I never traveled without my most critical possessions. I pushed aside my heavy steel-toed boots and my duffel bag, revealing a heavy, gray, fireproof lockbox tucked into the corner of the trunk. I spun the combination dial, my fingers moving entirely on autopilot. 3. 17. 42. The heavy latch snapped open. Inside, meticulously organized in color-coded folders, was my entire legal existence. Birth certificate, passport, social security card, property deeds, and vehicle titles. I bypassed all of them and pulled out a thick, blue, plastic folder at the very bottom. I sat on the bumper of the car, resting the blue folder on my knees. I opened it and pulled out a stack of stapled papers. At the very top was a document officially stamped by the county clerk's office in Hamilton County, Ohio. It was dated exactly 2 years and 3 months ago. The title at the top read, Revocation of Power of Attorney. 3 years ago, I had taken a 6-week backpacking trip across Europe. Because I was going to be unreachable in rural areas, and because I was in the middle of a complex property tax dispute with the city, I foolishly signed a limited power of attorney over to Richard and Margaret, just so they could sign certified mail and handle minor tax filings on my behalf. I trusted them with the administrative paperwork. But 2 years ago, in the middle of June, I received an alert from my bank about a suspicious application for a high-limit credit card in my name. I investigated it immediately. The IP address for the application traced straight back to my parents' house. It was Connor. He had found my financial details in Richard's home office and tried to steal my identity to fund a trip to Miami. When I confronted my parents, Richard brushed it off as a harmless prank, and Margaret begged me not to file a police report because it would ruin Connor's future. I didn't call the police. That was my mistake. But the very next morning, I marched down to the county courthouse and legally, officially, and permanently revoked that power of attorney. I filed the paperwork with the clerk, paying the extra fee to have it expedited. But I didn't stop there. By law, to make the revocation binding, you have to notify the parties involved. I mailed a certified, notarized copy of the revocation to my parents' home address. Attached to the back of the stamped document in my hands was the green return receipt from the United States Postal Service. It had Richard's messy, looping signature right on the dotted line, proving he had received and signed for the revocation notice. They had completely forgotten about it. Or, more likely, Richard had arrogantly assumed that because I was his daughter, a piece of paper meant nothing against his authority. They thought they still held the golden ticket. They thought they were conducting a brilliant, covert real estate transaction. They had no idea they had just committed a massive federal crime. I pulled my phone back out and dialed a number I had saved in my favorites list. It wasn't a family member. It was Harrison. Harrison was a 50-year-old real estate and contract attorney based in Ohio. I had hired him twice before to deal with complex historical preservation easements. Harrison was not cheap, he was not friendly, and he was not gentle. He was a legal shark who wore expensive suits and loved destroying people in a courtroom. Right now, he was exactly what I needed. He answered on the second ring. Valerie. I thought you were down south scraping paint off a plantation house. What is going on? Harrison, I need to put you on retainer immediately. I have an emergency, I said, my voice eerily calm. I sounded like a completely different person. The panic was gone. I was purely operational. I am listening, he said, the casual tone vanishing from his voice. My parents are currently attempting to close a cash sale on my primary residence in Cincinnati. Movers are currently emptying the property. They told me on the phone that the notary is at their house right now, and the funds are scheduled to be wired to their personal bank account by tomorrow morning. They are executing the sale using the limited power of attorney I granted them 3 years ago. I heard the distinct sound of Harrison's leather office chair squeaking as he leaned forward. Valerie, you revoked that document 2 years ago. I remember you asking me about the process. Exactly, I said, staring at the green postal receipt in my hand. I have the stamped filing from the county clerk, and I have the certified mail receipt signed by my father proving he received the revocation. They are using a dead, legally voided instrument to forge my signature on a property deed. Harrison let out a low whistle. Good God. That is not just a civil dispute, Valerie. That is grand larceny. That is felony fraud. I know, I said. And I need you to stop that wire transfer before the money hits their account and disappears into whatever black hole my brother created. Can we stop the sale? If they are closing with a notary today, the paperwork still has to be filed, and the funds have to clear an escrow account, Harrison explained, his voice rapid and precise. I am going to draft a lease pendens right now. It is a formal notice of pending action. I will file it electronically with the county courts within the hour. For those who don't know, a lease pendens acts like a radioactive bomb on a property title. It signals to the world that the ownership is under active legal dispute. The moment that hits the system, the title company will immediately freeze the transaction. No underwriter in America will insure a title with a pending fraud lawsuit attached to it. The escrow account will go into lockdown. They will not get a single dime tomorrow morning. Do it, I commanded. File it immediately. I want a complete freeze on the property. And Harrison? Start drafting the criminal complaint for felony forgery. Consider it done. Are you heading back? I am leaving right now, I said. I hung up the phone. I tossed the blue folder onto the passenger seat, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. The drive from Savannah to Cincinnati was roughly 10 hours. I was going to do it in 9. The drive from Savannah to Cincinnati is roughly 900 miles, a grueling 10-hour stretch of asphalt that cuts through the heart of the South and up into the Midwest. For most people, that kind of drive is a test of endurance. For me, it was a descent into a cold, focused fury. I didn't listen to music. I didn't listen to podcasts. The only sound in the car was the hum of the tires against the highway and the sound of my own rhythmic breathing. I used every mile to fuel my adrenaline with caffeine and pure, unadulterated rage. But I wasn't just driving. I was hunting. Whenever I had to stop for gas or a quick bathroom break in South Carolina or Kentucky, I pulled out my iPad. I had it mounted on the dashboard like a tactical display. You see, Connor is as lazy as he is entitled. Years ago, when I was still trying to be the good sister, I had bought him an iPad for his birthday and set up his Apple ID account under my family sharing plan. He was supposed to pay me back for the subscription, which he never did, of course. But because he was too arrogant to think I'd ever check, he never changed his recovery email or his security questions. He used the same variation of his high school football jersey number for everything. It took me less than 5 minutes at a rest stop outside of Charlotte to bypass his security and log straight into his primary email account. It was a disaster zone of spam, overdue notices from credit card companies, and frantic messages from people I didn't recognize. I didn't have time to read everything. I filtered the search for 3 words: contract, loan, and urgent. That was when I saw it. A thread from a user named Dom the Shark 77. The subject line was simply, final notice. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the body of the email. It wasn't a bank. It was an illegal bookie. Connor had gambled away $80,000 on offshore sports betting and online poker. The email was blunt. You are out of time, kid. 80,000 by Friday or we visit your family. And when we say visit, we mean we are coming for your kneecaps. I sat there in the driver's seat of my rental car, the engine idling, staring at the screen. $80,000. My parents weren't just selling my house to give him a leg up or a fresh start. They were selling my life to keep a mobster from breaking their golden boy's bones. They had looked at my 4 years of labor, my sanctuary, and my future, and they had weighed it against Connor's gambling debts. To them, the choice was easy. I was the expendable one. As I continued north, crossing the state line into Ohio, I dug deeper into the email chains. I found another thread, this one between Connor and our father, Richard. The timestamps showed the conversation began only a week ago. Richard had written to Connor, "Don't worry, son. Your mother and I have handled it. Valerie's place is just sitting there gathering dust while she plays with wood in Georgia. She's soft. She'll cry for a weekend, but she'll get over it once we explain it was for the family. We found a cash buyer, an investment LLC that wants a quick deal. We're using the power of attorney. Just keep your mouth shut until the wire hits." She's soft. Those 2 words echoed in my head, louder than the engine. They didn't just steal from me, they held a strategy meeting about my disposability. They assessed my character and decided that my kindness was a weakness they could exploit. They thought that because I worked with my hands and stayed quiet, I lacked the spine to fight back. Then I saw the sales contract attached to one of the messages. I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway because my hands were shaking so hard I almost lost control of the vehicle. My house, my beautiful, meticulously restored craftsman bungalow, was appraised by the bank at $450,000. It was a gem in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. And my parents had signed a contract to sell it to an entity called Quick Move Reality Holdings for exactly $100,000. They were literally throwing away $350,000 of my equity. They were fire selling my life's work at a 75% discount just to get $80,000 in cash by the weekend to pay off a loan shark. It was financial suicide, and they were doing it with my blood. The buyer, Quick Move Reality, wasn't an investment firm. I did a quick search of the Ohio Business Registry while waiting for my coffee. The registered agent for the company was a man named Vincent, but his associates called him Dominic. He was the same man Connor owed the money to. The loan shark was buying my house for a fraction of its value to settle a debt. My parents were so panicked, so desperate to protect their precious son, that they hadn't even realized they were being extorted for nearly $500,000 worth of property to cover an $80,000 debt. They were absolute idiots. I arrived on Elm Street at exactly 8:30 in the evening. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised, angry shade of purple and orange. As I turned the corner and saw my house, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant, cold hand. The sold sign that Mrs. Gable had seen was gone. The moving truck was gone. But the house looked wrong. It looked hollowed out, like a skull with empty eyes. My custom-built rocking chairs were missing from the porch. The curtains I had hand-sewn for the front windows had been ripped down, leaving the interior lights to spill out onto the lawn in a harsh, unflattering way. And there, parked in my driveway, sat my parents' beige sedan. They were still there. Probably celebrating. I didn't park in the driveway. I parked my rental car on the street, blocking them in so they couldn't leave. I walked up the stone path, stepping on the flagstones I had hand-selected from a quarry 3 years ago. My hands were steady now. The rage had moved past the point of heat and turned into something crystalline and sharp. I didn't knock. Why would I knock on my own door? I turned the handle, and to my disgust, it was unlocked. Why bother locking a house you've already betrayed? As I stepped into the foyer, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of the beeswax and lavender I used to preserve the wood. It was the smell of cheap cologne, stale beer, and greasy takeout food. The living room was a ghost of itself. My 1920s sofa, which I had spent 6 months reupholstering, was gone. My bookshelves were stripped bare, my collection of rare architectural history books tossed into cardboard boxes and stacked haphazardly by the door like trash. I followed the sound of voices into the kitchen. There, sitting around my breakfast island, were Richard, Margaret, and Connor. They were eating pizza straight out of the box. And in the center of the counter sat a bottle of vintage champagne, a bottle I had been saving for my wedding day. They had opened it. They were using my celebration to toast to my destruction. I stood in the archway, my shadow stretching across the floor. "I hope that champagne tastes like the felony you just committed," I said. My voice was low, flat, and hard, like a hammer hitting an anvil. The silence that followed was absolute. Connor froze with a slice of pepperoni pizza halfway to his mouth. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, but I noticed he was wearing a brand-new, expensive-looking watch on his wrist. My mother, Margaret, was the first to recover. Bah! I stood up, smoothing her skirt and wiping her mouth with a napkin, putting on that practiced, country club smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Valerie! Oh, honey, we didn't expect you back so soon," she exclaimed, her voice pitching up in that fake, fluttering way I used when I was caught in a lie. "We were just going to call you in the morning to explain everything." "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. My father, Richard, stood up, his face instantly flushing a deep, angry red. He tried to loom over me, using his physical size to intimidate me the same way he had when I was 12 years old. "Now you listen here, Valerie. Don't you come into this house giving orders. We are your parents. We had to step in and handle a crisis because you were off playing in the dirt in Georgia. We made a family decision." "You sold my house," I repeated, walking further into the kitchen, my eyes locked onto his. "We leveraged an asset," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the marble countertop so hard the pizza box jumped. "Your brother was in trouble. Serious trouble. He needed liquidity, and you have it. You're never here anyway. We did what had to be done to save this family. The sale closed this afternoon. The money is in escrow, and the wire transfer hits our account tomorrow morning at 9-inch. "And where is my furniture, Richard?" I asked, looking at the empty spaces where my life used to be. "Storage," Margaret waved a hand dismissively, as if I were talking about the weather. "Well, we sold some of the bigger pieces to the new owners. They wanted it furnished, and they offered a decent price. You should be thanking us, honestly. You can move back into your old room at our house for a while. It'll give you a chance to save some real money instead of wasting it on these dusty old buildings. It's time you settled down anyway." I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't even sorry. They were annoyed. They were genuinely irritated that I had interrupted their celebration. They believed that their authority as parents gave them a divine right to steal my future. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a piggy bank that they had finally decided to smash open. "You used the power of attorney," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Yes," Richard said defiantly, puffing out his chest. "And thank God we had it. It saved Connor's life." "The power of attorney that I revoked 2 years ago," I said. The room went deathly still. I saw Richard's eyes flicker for a fraction of a second. Margaret froze with the champagne glass halfway to her lips. Connor looked down at the floor, his face turning a sickly shade of white. "I don't know what you're talking about," Richard blustered, but his voice lacked its usual boom. It sounded thin, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "We never received any revocation notice." "I have the certified mail receipt, Dad," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out the blue folder. I didn't hand it to him. I held it up so he could see the green postal slip stapled to the front. "Signed by you. June 14, 2024. And more importantly, I have the stamped filing from the county clerk's office." I took a step closer, leaning my hands on the kitchen island. "But here is the part you're really going to hate. I called my lawyer, Harrison, 4 hours ago. We filed a lease pendens on this property at 4:30 this afternoon. The title is frozen. The sale cannot be recorded, and that wire transfer you're waiting for? It's not coming. The escrow company has been notified of potential fraud. The account is locked. Connor made a high, strangled whimpering noise in the back of his throat. He dropped his pizza slice face down on the counter. What? No, Valerie, you can't do that. You don't understand. I already did it, I said. You stupid girl. Richard screamed, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple. He lunged toward me, but I didn't flinch. Do you have any idea what you've just done? That money isn't just for us. It's for the people your brother owes. I know exactly who the money is for, Richard, I interrupted. It's for Dominic. For the $80,000 Connor gambled away on sports. Connor went completely white. Margaret let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her throat. How could you know that, I stammered. I know everything, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. I know you planned this via email. I know you were willing to sell a $450,000 asset for $100,000 just to cover his tracks. And I know that you committed a felony today. You forged my signature on a closing document using a voided legal instrument. That is fraud. That is grand larceny. And in this state, it carries a mandatory prison sentence. We are your family. Margaret shrieked, tears suddenly springing to her eyes. The weaponized tears I had seen my entire life. How can you be so selfish? Your brother's life is at stake. These people, they will hurt him, Valerie. They said they would break his legs. Then maybe he should have thought about that before he bet $80,000 he didn't have, I replied coldly. You don't get to burn my house down to keep him warm. Fix it. Richard growled, stepping around the island and looming over me again. Call your lawyer. Lift the freeze right now, or so help me God, Valerie, you will not have a family left. I looked him straight in the eyes. I don't have a family, Richard. I have 3 thieves who broke into my house. The standoff in the kitchen was broken by the sharp, rhythmic ringing of a cell phone. It was Connor's. He looked at the screen and began to shake so violently I thought he might collapse. He didn't answer it. Is that him? Richard asked, his bluster vanishing, replaced by a palpable, pathetic fear. It's Dominic, Connor whispered, his voice cracking. He wants the confirmation number for the wire transfer. Tell him tomorrow, Margaret hissed, grabbing Connor's arm. Tell him there was a bank delay. I can't. Connor cried out, jumping up from his chair. He knows. He knows the house was the collateral. If the sale doesn't go through. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified. Valerie, please. I'm begging you. They aren't kidding. Just let the sale go through. I'll pay you back. I swear, I'll get a job. I'll do anything. You've never paid back a dime in your life, Connor, I said. Valerie, look at me, Margaret pleaded, reaching out to grab my arm. I recoiled from her touch as if I were made of acid. This is life or death. We can argue about the house later. We can argue about the money later. But right now, we need to save your brother. Are you really going to let him get hurt over a building? It's not a building, I said. It's my life. And you didn't just sell a building. You sold my trust. You sold my security. But as I looked at them, Connor weeping, Margaret hysterical, Richard pacing like a caged animal, I realized the trap I was in. If I held the line and Connor actually got hurt, they would spend the rest of their lives making me the villain of the family narrative. Valerie let her brother get beaten up over money. But if I gave in, I lost everything, my home, my equity, and my dignity. I needed to change the battlefield. Give me the phone, Connor, I commanded. What? No. You'll make it worse. Richard shouted. Give me the damn phone, Connor, or I call the police right now and turn the 3 of you in for forgery, I snapped. Connor handed me the phone, his hand trembling. It was still ringing. I answered it. "Where is my money, Connor?" a low, gravelly voice rasped on the other end. "Hello, Dominic," I said. "This is Valerie. I'm the owner of the house you're trying to steal. We need to talk." There was a long pause. "I don't know who you are, lady. Put the kid on." "The kid is indisposed, and the house is frozen," I said, my voice projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "My lawyer filed a lease pendants this afternoon. You aren't getting the title, and you aren't getting the house. But listen to me very carefully. You are attempting to purchase a property via a fraudulent power of attorney. That is a RICO predicate act. I have an attorney on the other line drafting an affidavit for the FBI. I know you don't want the feds looking at your books over a measly $80,000. I was bluffing about the FBI, but I had guessed right. Men like Dominic thrived in the shadows. They preyed on people like Connor, who were too scared to call the cops. They didn't know how to handle someone who spoke the language of federal regulation. "What do you want?" Dominic asked, his voice dropping an octave. "You walk away from the house contract immediately," I said. "You sign a release, and in exchange, I don't send the file to the feds. The $80,000 Connor owes you? That's between you and him. But you stay away from my property." "He has until noon tomorrow," Dominic said. "Or he loses a thumb." He hung up. I handed the phone back to Connor. "You have until noon," I said. "And now, all three of you are going to get out." "Out? It's late. You can't kick us out." Margaret wailed. "I can," I said, pointing to the door. "Because if you aren't gone in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police to report 3 trespassers. And considering you forged a legal document today, I don't think you want to talk to the police." I watched them scramble to leave, grabbing their pizza boxes and their champagne like the pathetic thieves they were. As the door clicked shut behind them, I finally let myself slide down against the wood and cry. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The morning sun didn't bring relief, it brought the heavy, suffocating pressure of a deadline. Noon. That was the time Dominic had given Connor. I spent the early hours sitting on the floor of my empty living room, drinking coffee from a paper cup. My furniture was gone, my curtains were gone, but the walls were still mine. I had already changed the locks and installed a wireless security camera system. At 9 in the morning, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It wasn't my parents. It was the flying monkeys, the extended family. Aunt Diane, Uncle Russell, even my cousin Trevor. "Valerie, please go to your mother's house. We need to talk. Valerie, your mother is hysterical. Family comes first, don't be stubborn." My parents, realizing they couldn't bully me alone, had spun a narrative to the entire family. They were using social pressure to force me to lift the lease pendants. I knew that if I didn't face them now, I would be the pariah of the family forever. They would paint me as the greedy sister who let her brother get maimed over a misunderstanding. I dressed in my sharpest professional clothes, a tailored blazer and slacks, and grabbed my iPad and my legal folder. I drove to my parents' house. When I pulled up, there were 4 cars in the driveway. They had convened a full tribunal. I walked into the living room without knocking. Margaret was weeping on the sofa, flanked by Aunt Diane. Richard was standing by the fireplace, looking grim and noble. Uncle Russell, the patriarch of the family, sat in a wingback chair looking grave. Valerie, sit down," Uncle Russell said. "Your father told us everything. Look, we know you love your house. But this is Connor's life. We can't let a misunderstanding about paperwork stand in the way of his safety." "A misunderstanding about paperwork?" I repeated, looking at Richard. "Is that what you told them? We had a buyer lined up to solve Connor's debt, and you blocked the sale out of spite," Richard blustered. I didn't argue. I simply connected my iPad to their Bluetooth speaker on the coffee table. I'm not going to talk, I said. I'm just going to provide some context. I pressed play on the recording of the call with Dominic. The room went silent as the gravelly voice of a loan shark filled the air, threatening to take Connor's thumbs. I followed it up by projecting the emails I had found onto their large-screen TV, the emails where Connor begged for money for his gambling debts and the email where Richard called me soft and plotted to steal my equity. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Diane pulled her hand away from Margaret's. Uncle Russell looked at Richard with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. They were selling my $450,000 home for $100,000 to a criminal, I said to the room. They were giving away $350,000 of my life to cover up a gambling addiction. I'm not the villain here. I'm the only one trying to stop a federal crime. I walked out of that house and I didn't look back. I learned later, through brief updates from Aunt Diane, that the fallout was brutal. To save Connor from Dominic before the noon deadline, Richard and Margaret were forced to drain every cent of their emergency savings and take out a high-interest predatory loan against their own car titles and their house equity. They paid the $80,000, but it broke them financially. Within 6 months, they had to sell their own home and downsize to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. My lawyer, Harrison, was ruthless. We didn't send Dominic to the FBI, but we did go after the notary who had signed the forged deed. She lost her license and faced criminal charges, and to save herself, I rolled over on my parents. To avoid a felony conviction that would have stripped Richard of his pension, my parents agreed to a settlement where they paid my legal fees and the full replacement value of every piece of furniture they had sold. It wiped out the last of their assets. I returned to my house. It took me 3 months to restore it back to what it was. I bought a new sofa, found a beautiful antique dining table at an estate sale, and refinished it myself. The act of sanding the wood felt like therapy. I painted the walls a soft, calm sage green, erasing every memory of the beige chaos my parents had brought into my home. One evening, I was in my garden pruning the rose bushes. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, leaned over the fence with a warm smile. "They're looking beautiful, Valerie," I said. "Thanks to you, Mrs. Gable," I replied. "If you hadn't made that call, I would have lost everything." "I knew something wasn't right," I said. "You don't leave things unfinished. And you certainly don't leave without saying goodbye." I handed me a Tupperware container of homemade blackberry cobbler. I stood there in the twilight, eating the cobbler and listening to the wind in the trees. I am estranged from my parents, and I have no relationship with my brother. To some, that might look like a tragedy. But as I looked at my glowing windows and my secure, peaceful home, I realized it wasn't a tragedy at all. It was a restoration. I had finally stripped away the rot and restored my life to its original, intended state. So, that's my story. I've rebuilt my sanctuary from the ground up, but a few distant relatives still whisper that I went too far. They say I should have just lifted the legal freeze and let my parents pay me back eventually, rather than forcing them to destroy their entire retirement fund to save Connor from the mob. But honestly, I think I just handed them the bill for their own lifelong choices. Am I wrong for refusing to drop the charges and letting them hit rock bottom? Thank you so much for watching this story to the very end. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama. Moi ben loin qua ban du jup video lon toa den yu con jia han, camon ban rat you. Drop a comment below and let me know, would you have let the mobster take the house, or did Valerie do the exact right thing? See you in the next one.